and down, will never settle down.
Dear TRTF fanbase, my name's Tyler and I'm a filmmaking game designer. 2016 marks the second anniversary of the well-known fangame franchise, The Return of Freddy's. The series tasted that same dark, distinguished air as the original FNAF franchise, but in a level where no one in the community has taken it before, with 2 years of glowing reviews and massive downloads. TRTF connected with the public in a big way, but when the 5th installment was cancelled by me, it began to lose its way and the series was passed down to other developers almost a year ago. So as no one is no longer the holder of TRTF's development rights because of my choice of killing it off, I'm addressing you all in this essay to present my case on why exactly is the cause of TRTF's terminal failure, and hopefully in turn, having everyone leave the franchise at rest that it's been asking for ever so long ago. TRTF 1, 2, 3, and 4 were released under a few months from each other under the standalone indie game developer, me. All 4 titles were praised for its story, darkness, characters, and atmosphere. TRTF 3 was released around March of 2015, which outranked all the biggest fangame titles that year. All 4 TRTF games sit at the top 10 best released fangames of all time that year, and 3 rates the highest in the series. So why am I presenting this essay that follows the rest of the series such as 5, Frankfurt, and Rotzla? Well, between 4 and 5, there was not only an introduction to higher graphics over gameplay FNAF fan games, but an exchange to where you all saw me pass over my development rights to different teams. Something was clearly lost in translation when these new developers tried to execute their vision of TRTF, and this is what I want to discuss here. I want to put into 3 words the core creative essence of the primary games, and then put the new developers under the lens of this assessment to determine why and how these developers failed to engage audiences as successfully as the originals. So let's start from the beginning. The first TRTF game, FNAF 3 Fangame, hit online on December 24th as the 3rd fangame of FNAF to ever be released, and by the 3rd, the fangame era was officially upon the public. The only fangames to ever be released that year of 2014 was Creepypasta Castle, Plaza Treasure Island, and FNAF 3 Fangame. Plaza Treasure Island, which is undeniably the figurehead game for a scary FNAF atmosphere, places importance on atmosphere, character behavior, and level design, which is brilliant. Now the bounces off TRTF, which released that same year, highlights the reason the TRTF franchise began as strong as it did. Not only did TRTF present a strong execution of a point-and-click horror game, the storyboard and atmosphere were burning with lush detail. The crying of little children and enslaved co-workers of Phasma Incorporated. A lot of attention to detail in story, characters, and a balanced challenge the games had. I've used something within me to create the games. What I do is new in the game developing space, and I knew it. For TRTF 5, a fixed resolution allowed for an increased object render number, but Click Team still had its limits. With a limited amount of RAM in Click Team, I had some help from a good friend of mine. We used a new technique to keep the RAM limit from fluctuating in the game's entirety. We lowered the colors to an advanced state, converted sound files to OGG, and even hacked into Fusion 5 to strategically make TRTF 5 the programming marvel that it is. There were several devs attempting to recreate/revive TRTF 5, but was later cancelled after failing to achieve the complexity that TRTF 5 had on the same program. TRTF 5, even as an unfinished game, is a visual and programming marvel. Thus, beautiful is our first chosen word. The second word I want to argue for the TRTF franchise's creative essence is the word darkness. The games always had a dark and depressing state of atmosphere, dark and cold environments, crying of children and enslaved co-workers I had already mentioned, and a story behind it, which leads to the next thing I want to talk about, is story. The games always had a relatable story to each individual to where it connected most with the audience. Depressing states of anxiety, suicide of characters, cold-blooded accidental murder, and loss of a loved one, resulting in insanity, which bleeds perfectly into my third and final argument, insanity. The most subtly underlined but completely obvious technique in the franchise is my insane combination of different character personas. I emulated the ambience of real-life events taking place, making it connect with the player's heart, which leads to the player feeling emotional as a result from the book The Dreadful Truth. from a child version of one's adult self seeking the long path towards peace, to a control freak maniac wanting to conquer all. The inspiration for these things call upon real-life events that no doubt actually happen, knowing our society that we live in today, and everything that populates these things makes sense. What doesn't make sense? A lying storyteller in a white fedora and a red trench coat, leading a mafia gang to shift everything you know in the story by heart, to a beautiful lie instead of the dreadful truth. A common advertising technique is used when mashing together two things that don't naturally belong to create something compelling. I've used this technique here in the story's overall visual aesthetic, and people find it definitely interesting. And finally, you can see what I was trying to achieve by one specific character in the series, the Jester. Beautiful, darkness, insanity. Summing up, these three themes don't exist in separation from each other, but, as you've discovered, seems to continuously and intricately bouncing off from one another, from beginning to end. These themes have covered everything from visual and sound design, subtleties and character personas, to gameplay. The primary games are strong, as unpolished as they were, they crossed boundaries other developers didn't go to, and I clearly perfected the compelling system that flows through the 4 TRTF games in the saga, and it was downloaded by millions. But now let's look at the secondary games. TRTF 5 was announced as TRTF Remastered around mid-2015, 2 months after the release of TRTF 4. It was originally supposed to be TRTF 1 fully remastered from the ground up, but life had other plans for this game, and it soon turned into TRTF Rebooted. Later, the name was changed again to TRTF 5 because a reboot would mean starting the series over again with a new story. I worked hard enough on the story that I didn't want to start over on a perfectly good story that I took every bit of my time putting effort into, so TRTF 5 was born, and was the phase of TRTF's franchise that would change everything. People originally thought that this was the original location taking place in the future, but the origin part was incorrect. I snuck little details hinting to a very dark, disturbing, and heartbroken past, to a dark, depressing, destructive, and volatile ending to the franchise. I worked on all 3 games at the same time to wrap up the last bits of the franchise's story. That was the biggest mistake I've made for the franchise, which caused the fate of it. I soon lost motivation due to all the originality being drained out of me, putting so much into the last 3 games. It didn't help, and was slowly killing the franchise, and it soon did. I stopped before I could drain any more originality out of me. I want to save all my ideas from my own games, instead of it looking like I'm copying and pasting the ideas from the fan games to my original games, which would cause critics to go nuts and potentially have low ratings. I didn't risk it, so I stopped the franchise, and put it to a sudden hold. Some friends of mine wanted to finish the franchise for me, so I passed all my TRTF development rights to them, making me no longer own the franchise. I soon released the whole lore from TRTF 1 through 4, fully in-depth in detail, plot, and story, called The Dreadful Truth, as I had already mentioned before. People loved it. It made some be put in tears, it made some sick to their stomachs, and some even felt the pain and never forgot the experience again. That's how I develop my games. I do something with them that nobody ever does, and it involves something some people would call supernatural. People could feel the pain and suffering coming from the franchise, the tears, the stress, anxiety, depression. People could feel that energy unleashing from the game and into the player. The games I make always have a deeper and true meaning behind them, like the TRTF franchise's Life is Better Butterfly's Dream, for example, and that's what made the franchise special. And I still work like that to this day, but I will never tell how it's done, for it's a secret that must be kept away. Back to TRTF's terminal failure. I stopped when I lost all motivation and all inspiration for it, when I drained all my originality into it, instead of being smart and saving my originality for my own games, and not fan games, which will take me absolutely nowhere in life, but being stuck in a bad, poisoned fan base that doesn't appreciate you or your work. There are very few good seeds in the fan base, but the seeds keep getting overwritten by weeds. TRTF's new developers might think they know how the game works. Looking at the code is not exactly what I mean by this. It's how it's done that counts. I might have revealed the 3 core elements of the games, but I never revealed how the 4th one was done, and I never will because no one would understand. Personally, I still care for the franchise since everyone wants the final chapter in the series that will never be told. And I still care because I at least want it to be done right, which will never happen because no one understands how I pulled the franchise off. But in the end, I'd prefer the bones of the franchise to stay buried and put to rest, but still, I'm still interested to see what these new developers bring us, and I wish them the very best of luck. I want everyone to understand that no matter how many people beg me to come back to TRTF, I'll never work on it again. Being the second anniversary of the franchise, the time feels right for something different, and I'd love for everyone to experience again the romantic world of beautiful darkness and sanity. Which leads to the next beautiful chapter in my career, Seeker's Mania. Thank you all for listening. Sincerely, Tyler.
I think my fears come true. You